All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. As always, I'm your host, Eric Cunningham, and with us we have Joe Szymanski, Dylan Wade, and Kraz Grinitz, all with you at the same time this week. The full crew, as it were. We got some great stuff for you coming this week. Got some interesting political news. I know some of you are watching. If you're not watching this on repeat, some of you are probably watching the Georgia debate right now, which is going on between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. We'll talk about some of the stuff going on in Georgia. We'll talk about some of the stuff going on in Florida, which is a state we have a ratings preview for. And then at the end, we'll kind of close with the discussion on some of the silliness of the cycle. We're starting to see some interesting analysis and wish casting, I would argue, come out about some of these upcoming races. So we'll go ahead and start that with Florida. So Florida right now, we've been watching Florida. I'll kind of throw it to Kraz here, who can kind of explain more of what's going on. But we were very confident in Republican odds in Florida this cycle. We have become much more confident about them with these early voting. This is something we are planning a ratings change around. Some of these numbers, some of what we're seeing, the polling. It seemed like it's going to be a really, really bad year for Florida Democrats, even more than usual, as it were. So we'll go ahead and throw it to Kraz here. What are you seeing with these early vote? Is there anything we could look at these? Do we need to keep a caution with anything? And we'll kind of talk about some of the ratings we made last week and we're making this week in Florida.
Yeah, well, I would urge caution in a couple ways just to start out. I mean, the thing is that with early voting numbers, it's always hard to draw too many conclusions. So I'll get into the numbers here in a little bit. But, right now what we're looking at is that in 2020, mail-in ballots in Florida were about D plus 15. And Democrats had a higher turnout rate on ballots than Republicans did. Now it is about a 3-point gap in favor of Democrats. Mm-hmm. It's narrowed substantially, and Republicans have a turnout advantage on mail-in ballots. Mm-hmm. The reason why it's important to be cautious here, even though on the surface those numbers look pretty terrible, is that it's hard to know exactly why the numbers look like that. It could be that Republicans are headed for a total blowout win. It could also be that many Democrats who voted by mail solely because they were worried about COVID are now switching back to their normal habits of voting in person in some capacity. Obviously, mm-hmm. Democrats were usually more worried about COVID, and so it's more likely that they were the kinds of voters who would vote by mail once during the pandemic and then switch. And Florida does have a pretty robust culture of vote by mail, even among the GOP. However, mm-hmm. Again, there are still a couple negative signs here for Democrats. First is that in 2018, total early vote, including in person, which is almost always more Republican, was basically even. And these mail-in ballots are basically even right now. And obviously that is a negative sign for Democrats. They do need to be mm-hmm. building up a bigger lead. Also, some of Florida's most heavily vote by mail Republican counties in the Southwest were hit by Hurricane Ian a couple weeks ago. And despite that, despite the fact that, obviously those places should be lagging behind because of the hurricane, Republicans are still doing well in vote by mail. So these look pretty bad for Democrats. We'll see if they pick up over the next couple weeks, but they don't look great right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing looking here. We're seeing kind of a similar thing, if I'm correct, in North Carolina, I believe. Aren't we, Kraz? I mean, we're kind of seeing a similar pattern right now where obviously in North Carolina, obviously the vote by mail is still heavily Democratic, but compared to years, comparing to 2020, some would argue that maybe we shouldn't be doing that, but even I think comparing to 2018, the levels are just not there so far in this kind of early, the votes that have been turned in so far for Democrats and the return rates. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit stuffy tonight, folks. I'm coming down with a cold for sure.
Yeah, well, North Carolina is an interesting example because Democrats are not doing probably quite as well as they would want, and there's actually very few mail-in ballots for one reason or another. There's only about 30,000 votes so far, mm-hmm. But they've been holding steady for the last couple of weeks, and their turnout rate, while it still lags behind Republicans, has stopped falling. So it was about, I want to say, like 1.5% behind a week ago. Now it's only 1.1%. So in North Carolina, it's been a little bit better for Democrats. A caution there, of course, is that in-person early voting is huge in North Carolina. So that's really mm-hmm. the game. Right now there's only 30,000 mail-in votes. That's basically the equivalent of a small county. So it's not. Those are not game-changing. We're going to have to wait for in-person early votes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the in-person early voting For context, here begins on the 20th.
Yeah.
So it begins this Thursday. That's when we can kind of start seeing some of those numbers. And that's still, basically the way it works in North Carolina, absentee ballots, very heavily Democratic, very Democratic. In-person early voting, Democratic, but it's not the ridiculous Stalin-esque margins you get from the absentee voting. And then the in-person election day is just heavily Republican.
Yeah, and we, I remember, I mean, we'll talk about this more as we get closer, but I remember in 2020, we figured out that in North Carolina, Democrats and Republicans and independents split fairly predictably, even by registration, which is not the case in some states. And so we will have some kind of idea, going into Election Day, what kind of turnout do Republicans need? How heavily Republican do they need the turnout to be? So that will be an interesting discussion. But we'll talk about that more when we get closer.
Yeah, and so for context here, if we're looking at just from the last election, which again is not really entirely predictive of results. Last time, so Joe Biden got almost 700,000, just under 700,000 absentee by mails in North Carolina. Donald Trump got 278,000. So he got less than half of the absentee voting. That's a 2-to-1 margin, more than that. Absentee one-stop, 1.9 million for Trump versus 1.69 million for Biden. That was a benefit. And then election day was 581,000 for Trump, 292,000 for Biden. So again, that's the opposite of the absentee by mail. Republicans did really well on the one-stop election day voting. They did really well on election day normally, and they did very poorly on the absentee by mail. If you go back to 2016, which is a more normal election for North Carolina, looking at the website here, the general election website for 2016, absentee by mail, Trump actually won that by 7,000 votes. Clinton won the absentee one-stop by about 90,000, 1.38 million for Trump, 1.46 for Clinton. And then he won the election day vote, 875,000, 624,000. The number one constant is Republicans like to turn out on election day, and the absentee one-stop is the competitive chunk. And then you have that mail vote, which is not typically that much, being pretty heavily Democratic. Although that time, for some reason, it was more Republican leaning than usual. So again, caution for that because things could change. There's a reason Democrats aren't investing too much in North Carolina. There's a reason North Carolina is not the most competitive Senate race this cycle. That's the first time you can say that since 2008. Since that Helms Hunt race in '84, North Carolina Senate races tend to be the most expensive in the country. This is not one of those cases. This has been a very low key race, not on Democratic radar too much aside from a stretch opportunity. Florida, oddly, was probably going to be redder than North Carolina. I think almost everyone would say Florida's going to be redder than North Carolina, which I don't know when the last time you could point to that is.
I would put that up to the fact that North Carolina is an open race partially compared to Florida, which obviously has Marco Rubio, a decently strong incumbent running for re-election there. No matter what Twitter wants you to believe, Rubio is a stronger than average incumbent candidate for Florida, just as of kind of the facts there. But, I'd say with North Carolina, we've talked about it before with North Carolina. Since 2008, when everyone was very excited after Barack Obama and Kay Hagan's victories there, it's kind of been more of a blue mirage state more than anything. I think this is a state that repeatedly has come on and come back because it shows close elections and the polling shows it close. But I would caution with the polling too, because we have seen a lot of polling still very hot with low double digits to high single digit undecideds. The fact that we are in the middle of October, quite literally almost the middle of October, which it's October 14th today. The fact that we're still seeing that in polling in North Carolina, I don't think is great news for Beasley. I think a lot of those undecideds are probably going to go to Republicans. Some polling data starting to show that people who are undecided in polls probably are not necessarily super Democratic favoring voters at the moment. These people who probably do not like Joe Biden are probably independents. So that's not necessarily a great sign there if there's still a high number of undecideds. But, we're going to see where it comes down here. And I would say probably there's some key counties to watch on that night. Obviously, the biggest one is probably New Hanover County, the southeastern part of the state, Wilmington. Joe Biden won that by about 2 points. If Ted Budd wins that on the night, that race is almost assuredly over.
I actually don't think this race is going to be like that close. I don't know. I just think that when you think about the math for Beasley, it's very hard. I think that Budd is probably going to do better than Trump did in a lot of these suburban counties. Those places make up a lot of the vote. They make up almost half the vote in North Carolina.
Especially in the triad, the Piedmont triad, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and then the heavily, heavily Republican counties above and below it. We're talking 80% Trump counties.
When you start adding in like these big urban counties that have big suburbs and their big suburban counties, so Mecklenburg, Union, Cabarrus, Johnson, Wake,
Gaston,
places like that. The problem for Beasley is that Trump was like a record poor performer in a lot of these counties for a Republican in the last 20 years. I just think Budd is going to do a lot better. They make up over half the vote, which means she has to make up the vote somewhere else. And I just don't think there are enough votes out there in that other half for her to make up. And so,
yeah,
I just think that it's not going to be that close. I think the polling, Democrats are not seriously investing in any of the congressional races. Are they investing in North Carolina 1?
Well, yeah, they're investing pretty heavily in North Carolina 1.
Yeah.
I would actually be kind of concerned about that if I was a North Carolina Democrat.
Right.
Because Republican nominee Sandy Smith is arguably probably a weaker than
she's very weak. She's weak, and Davis is generally seen as a pretty strong Democrat.
So I would say the concern there for me would be that I think this is showing in some other states too. I think that there's been rumors about this too, that Democrats are worried about the black turnout in these states, northeastern Carolina, obviously there too. Specifically important because number one, it's rural. There's a lot of rural vote out there. It's not urban black vote like in Charlotte or Fayetteville. Is that what it is?
Yeah, Fayetteville. Yep.
Fayetteville. So it's a lot of rural black vote out there too. So the fact that Democrats are investing so much, I think, shows they're concerned about. But I wouldn't say at the same level as it was in the Virginia South Side in 2021, but I think they're worried about a similar drop-off level there in a similar area where we're seeing black population decrease. We're seeing swings rightwards in these areas. It's very similar to the Virginia South Side and North Carolina Northeast. Very similar in terms of their geography and
have Democrats really invested in the Bo Hines seat in North Carolina?
No. 13? Wiley Nichols is running an unconvincing campaign trying to convince people he's a moderate. Which, again, you're running against Bo Hines. Bo Hines is no moderate, but like Wiley Nickel has one of the most liberal records in the legislature. It's really not a convincing campaign. The South Side, though, that's a really good comparison. Republicans are actually heavily investing in hoping to flip a lot of those seats. Those seats, North Carolina is even weirder than Virginia, that we have basically a very strict whole county rule. It's called the cluster system. Basically, the way it works is that the legislature or the state Supreme Court decided that the Constitution's requirement that North Carolina districts be not split counties can be enforced if you say those counties need to be split as limited as possible. So they group counties into clusters, and you can only split those clusters as little as possible. And you can only split within clusters counties on a very specific basis, the largest county in the cluster. It basically limits what they can do. So House districts, like, for example, District 5, which contains Pasquotank County, county that flipped to Tillis in the election. The 24th and the 25th districts, you could have drawn one safe Democratic district there. Instead, they drew two Democratic-leaning rural districts that could potentially go. The 32nd district is another one of these. They're dealing a lot of this rural bleed, and it could be a turnout issue. It could be a genuine realignment. A lot of it, though, is the black population in those areas is dying off. So on top of all that, you've got Senate District. Senate District 3 is going to be the most competitive Senate district in the state in all likelihood. This is stretching from the black counties into the Outer Banks. The Democrat there has a residency issue. Basically, they're very, very concerned about that northeastern corner of the state. That's very clear. That's abundantly clear in the districts they're targeting and the districts they're showing up with money and in the congressional level. To Kras's point, though, with Beasley, even assuming she pulls margins like that in the Northeast, if she pulls Clinton-level margins, she goes back to Clinton-level margins in the Sandhills. She does really well in the mountains. She's got to do really well in the suburbs, and frankly, that's not on the key. That's not in the cards. People tend to forget how heavily populated some of these Republican counties are. Davidson County, North Carolina, this is south of Winston-Salem. This is a county Ted Budd would have been familiar with. 169,000 people gave Trump 73% of the vote. Randolph County has 145,000 people, gave Trump 78% of the vote. These are very, very, very Republican counties, and having someone like Bud from that area is genuinely helpful. I don't think North Carolina is on the top of their list to say they'd like to get. And the probably more concerning thing of those state Supreme Court races with no polling is showing those races to be competitive. It's looking like all of those races are going to flip to Republicans, which is probably their bigger concern than the Senate seat in the long run.
Yeah, and I think to Eric's point, I just think that if Democrats aren't seriously investing in North Carolina 13, which is basically suburban Raleigh plus some of its redder suburbs.
Biden plus 2. It's a Biden plus 2.
Yeah, it's a Biden plus 2 seat. I mean, I just think that's just, I don't think Beasley really has a path there. And so we have it likely are not SAFAR for a reason. I wouldn't totally, rule it out, but I just think that really hard for me to picture a path right now.
Mm-hmm. Especially considering it does take out a lot of those black voters, urban black voters, who could be less likely to turn out. It's actually dependent on that. It kind of surgically chops them off from the 2nd district, which then leaves, that district still very Democratic. But that was the hope, is that those would be the bulwark in the 14th. This is just like they did with the old 2nd, where it drew in a lot of rural areas and then the blackest, most urban areas of Raleigh to create a Democratic-leaning district that was very stable up until Bob Etheridge lost in 2010. It's just not a state on the radar right now. We have North Carolina likely Republican for a reason. We've had it this way the whole cycle. We've had Ohio this way the whole cycle. We've had Florida, which is a state we're probably be considering changing very soon at the Senate level. We're definitely changing the gubernatorial race. I can tell you that this week. That's one of the changes we're making. It's just difficult to see a Democratic path in a lot of these states, in North Carolina and in the Sun Belt in general. Aside from Georgia, the one strong point for them would be Georgia, where even that is, you have to wonder how much the Walker oppo is going to work and if it's able to hold it off until not only the general but the runoff, which there could well be. We have this as a toss-up. I don't know if we're going to declare it's going to be, if we're going to call a runoff before election night. We may make a special leans runoff category or something if you think it's going to go that way. There's a lot of time left in that race still, and it's showing it to be quite close.
Wait, Eric, are you telling me that Charlie Crist isn't going to pull off a miracle?
I mean, he's going to probably do better than Nikki Fried would have, to be fair. That's not saying much.
Okay, so like 38 versus 39%.
Oh, he's going to get... No, it's going to be like a 10. I would expect DeSantis to win by 8 to 12 points. That'd be the range. If he wins by more than 12, it would be genuinely shocking, because Florida's only... If he's winning by 12, he's not just winning Miami-Dade and Duval counties. He's probably winning Hillsborough. He's winning Hillsborough County. He's winning Pinal. He's winning probably Palm Beach at that point. Like, I just don't see that in the cards. That'd be pretty. I'll be surprised if that happens, to put it that way.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe against Nikki Fried though.
Yeah, Fried would have been a uniquely awful candidate. But yeah, while we're on the topic, let's go to Georgia. Interesting stuff going on in Georgia. Obviously, the Senate race we missed the last week, but there were some allegations about Herschel Walker that are not great. They've also They've also not completely ruined his polling, which is interesting. I have been saying the whole race, whoever goes negative first is the one that was losing. The fact that Warnock went this negative this early gives an indication of what his internal polls were standing at. And it seems to work better. The public polling has definitely rebounded in Warnock's favor. He's gaining 2 to 3 points in the polls. Take this from a race that maybe Walker was winning by 1 or 2 to one where Warnock is up by anywhere from 1 to 4 points in polling. That being said, it's not knocked Walker out. The debate's going on right now. I think the general consensus so far is that Walker has not utterly embarrassed himself on the debate stage at minimum, which is what a lot of people were expecting.
Hooray for low expectations, everyone. Everyone clap for low expectations.
Although the police badge thing is probably going to be all that's remembered.
Hooray for the memes.
Right, but it's not been a complete embarrassment. So the governor race, it's not competitive. Honestly, I'll be pushing for a safe Republican rating at this point.
Let's not go there.
No.
I've been wishing that for a while.
Boo you. I will say a couple things about Georgia, I think, in this debate, because I think it was interesting, and I watched a good chunk of it. I think that Walker did maybe better than expectations, but I also think that most observers aren't like steeped in the expectations. I think even in like for presidential debates, people have more expectations. They're bigger events. For Senate debates, if you tune in, which probably a lot of people didn't, the Braves are playing right now.
And they got their asses kicked.
They did get their asses kicked.
Oh, yeah, Red October, baby.
And I think that, you're not steeped in the expectations. You don't have a lot of priors about how the candidate should perform. So the fact that Walker did better than I think that many people were expecting probably doesn't really play that much into it. I do think Walker was clearly coached very well, and he had very good talking points. He hit Warnock on cash bail a couple times. He hit Warnock on his church evicting people pretty well. But he also, I think, struggled a lot of times just getting through sentences. His nouns and verbs didn't often line up. He sometimes said things that didn't make very much sense. He had to stop a lot. A lot of times it just wasn't even clear what he was saying. In particular, there was a healthcare answer where it was not at all clear to me what he was saying.
I was going to say the insulin answer was probably worse.
The insulin answer was up there too.
Was not good.
Walker's personal scandals did not come up as much as I expected them to. There were also a couple times where he tried to quote scripture back at Warnock, and I'm not sure how well that plays. I do think Warnock, as a fairly charismatic pastor, has been able to use his faith fairly well in a lot of his campaigns. And I'm not sure, like Walker at one point said something like, well, if you read the Bible more, and then another point said, thou shalt not bear false witness, tell the truth. And I'm just not totally sure how that comes off. Warnock's status as a pastor, it seems a little come off maybe as a little arrogant.
Yeah, I can't see that playing super well. Most of the reason, all of the reason he's known is for being a football player, not for being a pastor. So I'm not sure how well that's going to come.
Oh, they're godly men, those football players. Especially in the 80s, they had to pray. They had to pray they didn't break their neck every game day. But I think to go back to the allegations against Walker, people were not happy with me for saying that they were bad in the online spectrum and that this was bad. It's not good still, like the allegations of the dual abortions, number one, Herschel, you got to pay with cash. Don't sign a check. You can't be paying with those.
Yeah, you don't itemize. You don't itemize. This is for your abortion.
Yeah. You don't itemize that on the taxes.
Public Venmo request.
Can't be doing that. Pay with cash. Pay with cash, please. But second, all joking aside, considering the image he tried to build for himself, it's not a good look. We still don't know how many children Herschel Walker hypothetically has. It's not a good look. It's just not. I think I will see in the long run. I think how much this is actually going to hurt him. I think a lot of people thought wrongly that this was going to be something that was hurt him enough that was going to knock Warnock into a position where he could win without a runoff. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's very likely at this point that we're going to see a December runoff. Remember, it's December now. They pushed it up because after the last time one happened, something bad happened the next day. Mm-hmm. So, in memory of that, they've pushed it up. And we're going to get a much shorter time period where people are going to spend another $500 million in Georgia. This time on one race. So, I would say if you're following this race and if you're in Georgia, be prepared to vote again on the Senate race.
I will say one thing about Georgia polls, though, which is that they've been a lot more accurate the last few cycles than polls elsewhere. In North Carolina, the polling error the last few cycles, has more resembled the polling errors in the Midwest than the polling errors in somewhere like Georgia. Georgia polls have actually generally been fairly okay. And so I think if Warnock is up in the polls, which he is right now, he's scoring to 538, I think he would feel comfortable-ish. I think that the polling didn't really miss in Georgia in 2016. It didn't really miss in 2018, and it didn't miss in 2020 or the 2021 runoffs. It's actually pretty accurate. So I think that the scandals have clearly hurt Walker. I don't know. I think he did pretty well during the debate, but I also think that,
he didn't hit well enough.
Well, I mean, I think the thing I said this in one of our chats, right? Is that like I think the problem when you're steeped in politics, analyzing it, is that like we all know what Walker's going to say before he even says it, right? Because we know what the talking points are. So when he stumbles, like his healthcare answer was, I think, just baseline, not very coherent, and I think I can understand what he was trying to say because I'm steeped in the talking points, right? I know he was trying to say, if you're able-bodied and young, you should be able to get different health care than if you're not able-bodied and young, and a one-size-fits-all approach isn't right, especially when it's imposed by the government. But his answer was not even close to that coherent. And if you're not steeped in those talking points, you can't translate it in your mind to understand what he's saying. So I think that probably hurt him.
And a lot of the debate moments you'll remember come from gaffes the other person makes, and Warnock is just a very polished speaker. He's very rarely gonna make those Rubio Christie level mistakes. So the debate almost certainly won't change anyone's mind.
I would agree with that. Debates rarely change anyone's mind nowadays, unless you really royally screw up. And I don't know. I don't think anyone did. At least, that was kind of the point of Walker setting low expectations from his team, was that to make sure that.
Although I will say, though, I'm sorry, but the waving around the fake police badge.
The fake police badge was that's an interesting moment. That's going to be talked on. That's going to make the rounds on the election side of Twitter.
For any other candidate, that would have been that level of a gaffe.
But not for Herschel Walker, which I don't know what that speaks to the state of the race in Georgia.
Yeah, I think it does.
God bless America. Speaking of a God bless America moment, I think Eric knows what I'm about to talk about here. Take Mike Doyle in Pennsylvania's 12th district. Brad, have you seen this?
I can't. No. I refuse to
apparently
believe it's this
there's
dumb.
been enough recorded confusion about the Republic, because in the 12th district, Mike Doyle, a Democrat who's been there for like 20 years, is retiring. But the Republican candidate is also a man who goes by the name of Mike Doyle from Allegheny County. He's from Plum. He's from an outer Pittsburgh borough called Plum. And apparently, while door knocking, Democrats have gotten enough of confusing answers that says that Summer Lee, who's the Democratic candidate there, is running against Mike Doyle. That they're making Mike Doyle come out and announce his retirement again today because there was so much confusion about who Mike Doyle was.
This is almost as great as. Is this better or worse? Is this better than the Mike Estes fight in Kansas a couple of years ago?
That was great. That was my first thought.
I think that might be
Ron Estes.
of our viewers, though.
That
was a good one, though. Remember that.
I refuse to believe that this is a thing. I just refuse. This will not
It would
matter.
really be a downer on all like American intelligence, really, quite honestly.
It really would. If Mike Doyle can win this race just because he has the same name as the outgoing congressman, we just need to wrap up this whole project. This has been a failure. Because we know Mike Doyle's not going to win on his charisma or his incredible platform.
No, this is a Biden plus 20 seat. They're just dying to vote for a Republican here.
Yeah. I refuse to believe that this is a thing.
On the other hand, this is America.
That is fair, and it is very. If this happens on election night, you will see me very confused because I will be stuck between wanting to laugh and wanting to rip my hair out.
I want to preface this isn't going to happen, but it's just funny that they had to say it.
It is. It won't.
Don't the ballots have party labels?
Actually, no. I don't know if. Yes, we do. Yes, of course. General elections, we do, of course. Yeah, but we also have. People don't know. Maybe Mike Doyle, he's white. He's an old white guy. Maybe he changed his registration to Republican.
Wait, isn't Mike Doyle black?
No, he's white. Mike Doyle is very white.
I thought Mike Doyle was black.
His name is Mike Doyle. He looks like what you would expect a Mike Doyle from
white,
Pittsburgh to be.
Irish, old school.
Okay, I thought he was. Don't listen.
No,
I'm thinking of Dwight Evans.
Yeah. Wrong side of the state.
Don't listen to me.
I also wanted to touch. Can we do Nevada before we do our reach state segment?
Yes, please, Nevada.
Because this has been a topic of furious debate because I think that the polls in Nevada, I mean, they just suck for Democrats. Like, I think it's so. Okay, I will preface this by saying Nevada is probably the one state where it actually is usually fair to read a lot into early voting numbers because so much of the state votes early. And the votes split so cleanly on registration lines. And so we will not get those numbers for another about a week and a half in any meaningful sense. But in absence of those numbers, I mean, the polls are not good for Catherine Cortez Masto. In the last likely voter polls we have, she has not led a likely voter poll since late August. Likely voter polls, or no, one today from USA Today.
Yeah,
since then,
that was a poll that had her up 8, and now she's up 3.
So 2, yeah. So in the likely voter polls, we can see at least on 538, we're looking at Laxalt plus 1, 1, 4, 3, 2, 2, and then Masto plus 2 today. I think the problem is that while polls historically underestimated underestimated Democrats in Nevada, that was not as much the case in 2020. And so this is a good lesson in why you should not always bank on the polling error being exactly the same year to year. I think that
I am begging you to explain this concept to some of my conservative friends who are repeatedly pointing out that in 2020, that Martha McSally overperformed the polls against Mark Kelly by like 3 to 5%.
Yeah,
that's not how polling errors work.
But she didn't do that in 2018, though, right? Remember, like the polls were very accurate. So in a lot of states, it's not clear year to year. There's not a consistent polling error. I think that the polling industry has not been upfront that there has actually been a very consistent polling error in the Midwest, basically since 2016.
If there were a consistent polling error, the pollsters would fix it.
You would think that, Dylan, but I don't believe that.
They have not.
I don't believe that the pollsters have fixed anything.
They have not.
Yeah, it's worth noting this also applies to the gubernatorial race. In the last, unlike even with Catherine Cortez Masto, even those two one poll where Cortez Masto led, Joe Lombardo's up over Sisolak. Sisolak has not led a poll since the middle of August. Fabrizio Ward. And then there were 2 other polls. There were actually 3 other polls. There was a Suffolk poll in August. And then, actually, no, there was I guess that's the registered voter part of the Fabrizio Ward poll. Basically, since July, Sisolak has led like 2 polls, which is not good. This is consistently very not good, but also we're not going to base everything purely off polls, especially in Nevada. That being said, if there were a state we were to move from toss-up right now, it would probably be Nevada. That would probably be the soonest one we would move, except maybe Pennsylvania, because we don't know what's going. Like, Nevada has not looked good. It's not looked good.
Yeah, if we were going to move Nevada, I would aggressively push us to move Pennsylvania too, for the same exact reason. But I don't think we should move either.
Yeah, for now, we're keeping them in place, but like we want to see these early voting because this is going to be pretty telling. Democrats have been basically blaring the alarms about poor Hispanic turnout and organizing, that it's not been going very well. If that's the case, we'll probably see it. I would think.
Yeah, I think we'd see it in the early vote numbers. I mean, I don't know. I think that it's tough to predict polling error, and so that's why I don't think Democrats should bank on one in Nevada.
Yep. But now, speaking of polling errors, let's talk about a bunch of garbage polls that have come out lately.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think. Oh, well, I'll let you finish. But I just want to say, I think one of the reasons for this, we've seen a lot less high-quality polls this year. New York Times is doing virtually no polls. A lot of companies are doing very few polls this year, and I think that's because polls got so many problems. A lot of companies don't want to invest in them, and so as a result, these really cheap, hackish polls are
Center Street. No, you're kidding. Center Street PAC is the most reliable polling out there. Second only to Big Penguin polling. Those are the 2 most reliable right now.
Come on, Trafalgar.
We love our friends at Big Penguin.
Come on, Trafalgar told me that Dr. Oz was winning 30% of black voters.
Hooray!
Look, if you don't trust Big Penguin Polling, the only polling company with an anime girl in their avatar. I don't know what you're doing.
That's kind of sad.
Oh my god! I am unfamiliar with Big Penguin Polling.
They're a fake polling firm. They don't exist.
We're not going to go into this. We're not going into this tonight. No.
So there have been 4 states where there's been a lot of nonsense going on. Let's talk about the 3 of them that aren't happening. South Dakota, Utah, and New York. I am telling you, despite how very vigorously I've been contesting the South Dakota stuff, no other outlet has moved this to likely Republican because the polling doesn't exist and it's garbage. Kirsten Noem is popular and has been above water by like 20 percentage points in virtually every poll this year. So coming out of nowhere from a garbage firm that had Biden and Trump at the same approval rating in South Dakota in 2020 is not a great idea. That being said, the South Dakota people are far less annoying than the New York people. Every single time there's a garbage New York poll coming out, I have gotten, when are you moving New York? When are you moving New York? Here's my answer. We're not moving New York.
Even if Lee Zeldin wins, it's still safe Democrats.
Yes.
So, here's another one from Taurus in the comments. When are we moving Utah?
Good God. Let's finish New York before we get to the stupidity that is Utah. All right, so look, winning New York is not possible for Republicans right now. Here's the problem. Look, try the election shuffler out. I want to actually modify the turnout down to gubernatorial levels. You can give Zeldin Molinaro margins in upstate New York. You can give him 2014 Astorino margins in western New York and Rochester. You can give him Trump 2016 margins in Long Island. You can take like 20 percentage points from Democrats in New York, just wipe that off the board, and he still loses by like 10 points. It's not happening. I'm sorry. It's not feasible. Could he lose by 15? I mean, maybe. I don't know, but like that doesn't make it likely. If you're losing by 15, it's still safe. There's no scenario where Lee Zeldin is going to win this thing. You can get me if he somehow does, but like it's not happening. It's not mathematically something that is in the cards for Republicans.
On the other hand, it would be apocalyptically funny if Republicans couldn't beat Andrew fucking Cuomo, but they could beat Kathy Hochul.
Yeah, so just
that was before Andrew Cuomo would turn out to be like a massive sexual assaulter and harasser. But you know,
yeah, but he was always.
And before he killed people in nursing homes, also don't forget about that one.
Wait, so just to illustrate, I think how hard Zeldin has a reverse Beasley problem, and if the math is just not there, like. I'm looking at the closest statewide election in New York recently. This was the 2010 comptroller election where Democrat Thomas DiNapoli.
I have a map. Of this.
Yep. I have the map. I have the county map up right now. Beat Harry Wilson, the Republican, by 4.5 points. Okay, so this was fairly close. Okay, here are the things that Zeldin would have to do to replicate that performance. You would have to get Molinaro margins in most of rural and suburban and exurban upstate New York. So in Saratoga Springs and Utica, you'd have to get huge margins there. That's possible. Okay, fine. I think that's possible. Then he'd have to only lose Albany County by 3%. I'm here to tell you that is not happening. And then he would have to only lose Ithaca by 20%. I am also here.
That's definitely not happening.
Not happening. So then he'd have to win big in Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. We're talking double digits big in all of those cities. Look, if he gets what's his face margins in Western New York,
Astorino
margins in Western New York, or no, not Astorino.
What's his
Molinaro?
No, Palladino.
Yeah, Palladino margins.
If he gets Palladino margins out there, okay, maybe, but he's not going to get Palladino margins. That guy was a unique candidate. He's not going to get those.
He is a very unique candidate. I can tell you that.
Yeah, he's not going to get those. But here's the other kickers, right? I mean, Wilson did really well in Long Island. So let's give Zeldin his performance in Long Island. Mm-hmm. Then Wilson did not do that well in Staten Island. Let's say that Zeldin crushes it in Staten Island. Okay, that gets him a little bit closer, assuming that he's Matt Coulson's performance in upstate through some combination of performances. Here's the kicker. Wilson got 26% of the vote in Manhattan. That is not happening. And Wilson lost Westchester County by 1.5%. I don't need to explain to people why Lee Zeldin is not going to lose Westchester.
You could actually genuinely win New York as a Republican on generic Sweeney, and you would lose Westchester County.
Yes, so it's not happening. Even if you give him Wilson's performance in upstate New York, which is probably the best he could hope for in aggregate, he would have to have insane performances, with wealthy downstate Democrats, basically. I mean, maybe he has an incredible performance in Brooklyn and the Bronx. I don't know, but I'm not seeing the math.
It's not viable. So that's why we're not moving New York. Even if every single poll comes out and says it's a 5-point race, it's not happening. The math is
why we're not
there.
in Oklahoma either.
Yeah. Oklahoma. Let's go to Oklahoma next. Actually, Oklahoma last, because it is the most viable of these. Utah next. It's not happening. I'm telling you right now, it is not happening. There is no scenario where Evan McMullin.
The thing that frustrates me with Utah specifically is that we have had notoriously shitty polls out of Utah from any non-Mitt Romney race, hypothetically spinning the idea that Utah is competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And then it never happens.
Yeah, Trump won Utah by 20 percentage points in 2020, and he won it by 18 in 2016. Granted, that was a 45-27 win with McMullin getting another 21%. Today, most of those McMullin voters would not have voted for Hillary Clinton. It's just the polling in Utah. The final average in New York was Trump plus 10, Trump plus 9.5. That is garbage polling. That is very garbage polling. That is
but also,
bad.
I think this is hilarious. Trump won by 20%. The number of Biden voters or third-party voters who are going to vote for Mike Lee is probably way higher than the number of Trump voters who are going to vote for Evan McMullin. So the math is just not there.
Mike Lee won his last Senate race by 41 percentage points.
Good for Mike Lee.
Mike Lee his brand somewhat. I know that there is discussion that he is a little bit too close to Trump, who's not a particularly popular Republican in Utah. That he's a little bit abrasive and a little bit close to the Trump wing of the party. But it's still Utah, and Lee is still, I think, fairly popular. There's just no path here for McMullin. The independent label isn't fooling people. It would be one thing if McMullin was a genuinely fairly conservative independent who was running, on the premise that Lee had just gotten too close to Trump, but otherwise McMullin did have actually conservative views.
You mean run like he did in 2016?
But he doesn't actually have any conservative views.
That
so
still wouldn't work. Even if he had run that type of campaign, he tried it in 2016.
You know where you run that campaign? In the Republican primary.
Yeah, Lee only got 50-something% of the Republican primary vote against a moderate challenger who said, that she was a Republican who was conservative, who was not close to Trump like Lee was. I think McMullin would be doing better if he said, I have all these conservative beliefs, but I just think Lee has gotten too close to Trump.
Actually, to be fair, Lee got 62% of the vote.
Okay, 62.
Yeah, Becky Edwards got 30%, Ali Aslan got 8%.
That's still not great, right?
That's not great. He got 50% in Salt Lake County.
John Day says 2014 Kansas Senate race all over again.
Except
comparison.
That one, the independent was leading all of the polls, and also there were a lot of them. Utah Center Street Polling, which is a fake polling firm that does not actually put out genuine polls, has McMullin down. Okay,
it's like when Trafalgar shows Fetterman up still.
It's like that one, the Republican in 2018 that put up a poll showing him leading Kurt Schrader by 20 points. Or the Doug Jones campaign put a poll showing them down 1, and then Evan Scrimshaw's like, maybe Republicans can lose Alabama, and then he loses by the same margin as Trump because it's Alabama. I mean, a win for
anybody had Alabama at a toss-up.
A win. Cook might have had it for a while. I'm not sure. Utah.
I think Cook only had it at Lean Czar at the end.
41%. For McMullin would be great. Again, this is not happening. We have this at safe. We've not moved this to likely. We'll be keeping this at likely. We'll be keeping this at safe even if McMullin wins. Again, we'll deny reality itself.
What did McMullin get in 2016?
21%.
I would be surprised if he gets much higher than that.
In the no, he Democrats have a pretty good floor right now in Utah, like 35%. Like, what was it? Becky Edwards in 2016 in the Senate race in Utah got 20, or Misty Snow got 27% of the vote in Utah. In 2018, Mitt Romney actually got Jenny Wilson got 31%. I would think McMullen's floor is like 35, 40. This actually does not give me Kansas 2014. This gives me Hawaii 2012 vibes, where people were convinced for the whole year that Linda Lingle was going to make this a competitive race, and she loses 63-37 because it's Hawaii. I mean,
it is Hawaii, and
yeah. Now, before we get to Oklahoma, which there is some actual credible stuff in Oklahoma that indicates this could be a 10 to 15 point race. South Dakota. There is supposedly 4 polls in South Dakota showing a close race. Of these, one of them has been released publicly. This one poll was from South Dakota State University. South Dakota State University did not do polling before 2020, and their 2020 polling was terrible.
Let's talk about Oklahoma, though. I actually do want to talk about Oklahoma.
Yeah. Oklahoma. So Oklahoma is a state that could be somewhat interesting, but here's the problem: is that the coalition you need in Oklahoma to win is not viable. Kevin Stitt is somewhat unpopular in rural Oklahoma, especially among Native American communities. Keep in mind, though, even in the 5th District, the Native American vote is only 27% of the vote. This is also a district that gave Trump like 70% of the vote. So, like, I would not be surprised if Joy Hoffmeister wins a couple of counties in the 5th District. I would not be surprised if she wins Oklahoma County. In fact, she probably will win Oklahoma County. What I would be surprised by is if this raises anything closer than 10 points, because it's Oklahoma. I'm pretty sure Kevin Stitt could shut down all the schools in Oklahoma for a month, and he would probably still win because it's Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where I think, okay, so apparently Stitt is unpopular because his education agenda has been unpopular. I can't speak to the validity of this because I don't follow politics, but just accepting that as true. The rural areas are the places that rebel the most among Republican areas on things like vouchers.
Yeah.
Like the reason why Texas doesn't have school choice is because of rural areas still and rural Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with this is that these areas are blood red. They have a ton of highly partisan Republicans who have lots of socially conservative views. And so are they really going to cross over and vote for a pro-choice Democrat?
Pro-choice, pro-gun control Democrat who does not have a single moderate policy position, is not running, hey, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican. I switched to the Democratic Party just so I could run against Kevin Stitt, and after I'll switch back, or something along that line.
Because they're pissed at Stitt about vouchers. I just don't think that's in the cards. And you have to remember, like, the only candidate I can remember in the last 6 years who's been able to win with a coalition that got much larger shifts in heavily white, heavily Republican, rural areas was Andy Beshear. He was the only one I can remember, and maybe, I guess, technically Joe Manchin, but those two were the only I can remember who won because their coalition got 40, 50, 60-point shifts in heavily white rural areas. I just don't think Hoffmeister's going to.
And you want to know why? You want to know why Matt Bevin did terrible on those areas?
Yeah.
Because he was record unpopular as governor. He was beyond unpopular as governor. This is a guy who won his primary against Robert Goforth, a literal nobody who I believe is in jail right now.
Possibly. I forgot about this, but it's coming back to me, though. You're right.
If you look at the primary map, where did Robert Goforth win counties? Because Robert Goforth won a lot of counties. He won them in counties that Democrats traditionally did pretty well in because of school issues. He did very well in that congressional the Kentucky Congressional.
Oh yeah, he was convicted of fraud.
Yeah. Again, not a great guy. Not a great guy. Not a great guy.
Oh,
not a credible candidate.
They also domestic violence as well.
Yeah, he won almost all of his counties came from the 5th Congressional District, which is the one with a ton of ancestrally Democratic areas. Also, he won the most Republican counties in Kentucky in that primary.
Yeah.
He won. These are counties that vote a zillion points to Republicans. These are counties, right off the top of my head.
I'm going to bring it up there, Eric.
Go right ahead. One of them beat Jackson County, Kentucky. So Jackson County, Kentucky. I am fairly certain this is a county that Goforth got 80% of the vote in the primary.
Goforth is in the green here. You can see where Eric is talking about.
So Jackson County, Jackson County gave Donald Trump 89% of the vote in 2020. Jackson County has literally never voted for a Democrat ever in a presidential election. He was so unpopular. He was losing 80% of the. Goforth was getting 80% of the vote in counties that have not gone Democratic ever, literally ever, in presidential elections. The only time it didn't vote for Republicans was when it voted for Teddy Roosevelt in 1916. That is a level of unpopularity that Kevin Stitt does not have. Objectively speaking, Kevin Stitt is not that unpopular. If you look at the primary, the governor primary in Oklahoma in 2022, again, there's a nobody on the ballot, just like this time. Kevin Stitt got 69% of the vote. Did he do poorly in some counties? Yes, he got 40 to 50% of the vote, and he got 40 to 50% of the vote in one county, and he lagged behind in some rural counties in the 5th district, or in the Native American rural portions of Oklahoma, probably more attributable to the Native American conflicts he's had with the tribes. He did really well, though, in places where Democrats actually need to do better, which is Oklahoma City, Oklahoma County, what's the one? Not Cherokee County. It's the he did very well in counties that Democrats need to do well in. There's not a sign of rampant base dissatisfaction with Kevin Stitt. There just isn't. Could this be a 10 to 20 point race? That's not impossible. Democrats do this all the time. If you look at, for example, 2014 in Oklahoma, Republicans actually never won all of the counties in a gubernatorial race in Oklahoma. It's never happened. I don't think any candidate has ever actually blanked it. In 2014, the peak of, big Republican wave year, Mary Fallin won that gubernatorial race by 14 percentage points over Joe Dorman, a pro-life state senator who won 5 counties in the Native American 5 tribes portion of the state, as well as one other county. In 2018, Drew Edmondson, another heavily touted Democrat, got 42% of the vote. Kevin Stitt still won by 12, and he only lost 2 counties in that area, as well as the 2 Oklahoma County and the county right below it. I just don't see the math. I don't see it here. I could be wrong. We could be wrong. This is a state, if there's a bunch of polling coming out, high-quality polling, we consider it. But again, we point back to Missouri in 2020. On-the-ground Republicans in Missouri were terrified in 2020. They were horrified with the prospect that Trump could actually lose in Missouri, that it was close, that the gubernatorial race could be close, that Ann Wagner was willing to lose in the 2nd district. None of those things happened. Wagner won by 7 points. Trump won by 20 points, as per usual. And in the gubernatorial race, Republicans had one of their best margins of victory ever in Missouri. So, I don't see it. Do any of you guys see a scenario where Lord Hoffmeister can win this thing?
No, and I think it's so. There was this long. Okay, this is going to go a little bit on a tangent, but I think it's a useful illustration. There was a long string of thought around 2016. The real reason a lot of white working class voters voted for Donald Trump was because Democrats were insufficiently progressive. They were too pro-free trade. They were too pro-corporation, and that these voters were rebelling and voting for Donald Trump. This was patently an insane idea because I've continued to vote for Republicans. They become even more Republican. And even when Democrats put up Joe Biden, who honestly is probably the most pro-union president since Jimmy Carter, a lot of those places became even more Republican. Similarly, the idea that a bunch of deeply conservative, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment conservatives in rural Oklahoma are going to cross over and vote for a standard Democrat for governor because they are upset about voucher programs is just, it just doesn't pass the smell test for them. Voters are not stupid. They understand how policies and parties work. So it just doesn't pass the smell test for them.
This is the same problem you have in any district that's beyond 15 points in the other direction, right? There are a bunch of voters you can win over. If you're at Glenn Youngkin, you can win over voters because people are mad at Joe Biden and they don't love Terry McAuliffe, and you're running as the perfect suburban, moderate sort of Republican that they used to vote for 10 to 20 years ago that they love. And that works. You could be an Andy Beshear, who's literally the son of a very, very popular former governor running in a state that Democrats do well in gubernatorial races, had the legislature in until recently, running a perfect storm where Matt Bevin is like the least popular governor in the country. People are genuinely pissed at them. You have a Robert Goforth winning counties that are by ridiculous margins in the primary. Like, you need things like that. We think Oregon is a stretch. Oregon is a very competitive state. It's still difficult just because of how states work. You have to have an angle. What is Joy Hoffmeister's angle? It's vouchers, sure. There's also superintendent race up. That's the more credible of the two. If Joy Hoffmeister were, this is actually the case. If Joy Hoffmeister were running as independent, this could actually work. She was elected as a Republican. She was elected statewide as a Republican. She could have run the primary against it. She could have run as an independent, and especially if a Democrat was on the ballot, that could have actually been pretty effective foil. She could say, well, I'm not the Democrat. There's a Democrat right here. I am not the Democrat running. I'm a conservative running against it. She did not do that.
She wouldn't win if it were a 3-person race, though.
She wouldn't win. She wouldn't win as it is now, though. So, like, what's the difference?
I think this is going to end up being a lot like New Jersey 2021, where everyone's surprised by how close it is, but it's hard to. There's a gap that you just can't really bridge. No matter how close you can get it, there's still that final bump. It's like North Carolina. It'll be close, but it's hard to get those last 4%.
Yeah, Jack Ciattarelli did as well as you could as a Republican in New Jersey. He won counties that Trump lost. He did really well. He did well in South Jersey. He did well in North Jersey. He did well in the suburban affluent suburbs. It's that last 3 to 4%. He could not get past that. Like, what is the scenario where I would actually love to? This is a challenge to everyone. If you are watching this and you are genuinely convinced that Oklahoma is, show me your feasible map, which is the Joy Hoffmeister winning scenario. That's not just a generic swing, 35 points in the other direction. Because again, that's what you need, a 35-point swing. Don't do a generic swing. I want you to like go into the turnout model here, model the 5th district, model, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, college towns, like the difficult. It's just the math. It's not a credible scenario.
She would need 40 to 50 point shifts in a lot of rural Oklahoma, and for turnout to decline there, and get 30-point shifts in the suburbs and college towns, and for turnout to go up there.
Yeah, and she needs to do better. She needs to do, frankly, better in the urban counties than Democrats did in 2018, which is a high watermark for them in all likelihood in a lot of these places.
Yeah.
It's just not likely. If there's a stretch state to look at, again, it's probably Oregon. Would probably be the when we have this as a toss-up. We have that as genuinely a toss-up. If you want to look at an actual state we have as likely, a likely state that we could potentially see going there because of polling there, the closest thing you could get would be like a Rhode Island, right, where it just comes out of left field. You have a compelling candidate. You have an unpopular governor. You have a Republican nominee who's not awful. Like, if that was within 5 or 10, I wouldn't be shocked. I would think that's more likely than seeing Oklahoma within 5 or 10. And
another reason I'm skeptical of these polls, and the last point, it's like a lot of these polls that have showed it close have also polled the Senate race, and especially the special Senate election between Markwayne Mullin and Kendra Horn. And the last polls there that have shown a close race have Mullin plus 12, Mullin plus 12, Mullin plus 11, Mullin plus 9. If you're watching this and you think that a federal Republican running in a highly polarized federal race in Oklahoma is only going to win by 12 points, man, do I have a bridge to sell you. There is no way, like absolutely none. Let me emphasize this. Oklahoma is a Trump plus 35 state. Okay. The fundamentals point to a 40-point GOP win in the Senate race. There is no planet, Earth, Mars, Venus, nowhere.
Neptune.
Where the Democrats in Oklahoma are going to outrun the fundamentals by 30% to trade this. How absurd this would be. Richard Ojeda, who probably outran the fundamentals by the most in the country in 2018, outran the fundamentals, if I'm remembering right, by something like 25 points. Okay.
Does everybody remember Richard Ojeda?
And that was like, And that was like the most.
Good times.
And even then, he was still the worst performing Democrat in the West Virginia congressional delegation that year too.
Yeah, so there's 0% chance.
For context here, for the Senate races in Oklahoma, here are all the Senate races since 2010. 2010, Tom Coburn 71%, Jim Rogers Democrat 26%. 2014 Senate election, James Lankford 68%, Condi Johnson 29%. Notice the pattern here. 2016. Lankford 68, Mike Workman 25%. Oh, that's not very good. I wonder why.
I also want to point out to
2014 Info 68 to 28. 2020 Jim Info 63 to 33. If you think that Democrats are going to get 40% in Oklahoma when they can't cross 34, like, good luck. Good luck.
I also want to point out about Ojeda. He did like significantly worse, and I remembered like the man lost by 13 points and almost 20,000 votes.
He lost by 13.
Yeah, but he lost by 13. Remember, that was a Trump plus 40 district. The fundamentals there.
I would say that's still like an incredible performance, but like
that's incredible. But that means he still only outperformed the fundamentals by 21 points, and I think that was probably the most impressive. Okay, most impressive performance. Take it back. Maybe Joe Manchin. So if you think Kendra Horn is going to put up a Joe Manchin style performance in Oklahoma, then she can maybe get there. But
you don't understand. Everyone loves Kendra Horn. She is the most popular, and that's why she won re-election in 20. Oh wait.
Oh.
Like it's just. Oh yeah. Yeah. Remember when Ojeda threatened some guy in a Twitter space? Yes, I do remember that.
That's on brand.
I do remember that. That was a good time. That was a good night.
Yeah, that's on brand.
But yes, so again, like when we're talking about reach states, there are states you could feasibly do better in. Again, like a Rhode Island. I'm not saying Rhode Island's competitive. We have it likely for a reason. I would not be shocked if it's 5-10 in the end because you have a state that's known to cross party lines to vote, that has a terrible Democratic incumbent, that has a competitive race where Republicans are going to do really well in Cranston in all likelihood, which is a place you need to do really well. And like, there's a scenario where you could get close. There's not a scenario where you win. Oregon, you have an independent running. You have the least popular governor in the country, like actually least popular, like not like imagined in Twitter's head that Kristi Noem is 50 points underwater because reasons, I guess, or Stitt, who's like, even like I think the last one he was at +8. There are ways you can make races competitive. This is not one of them. We're skeptical of these. We were skeptical of these in 2020. I would argue we were not skeptical enough. I regret moving South Carolina out of safe Republican in hindsight. That should have stayed at safe Republican the entire time. We moved it as likely. We were cowards. We didn't move it to leans ever, but even moving it was cowardly. We're going to hold our ground on these until we actually see convincing evidence something is going on. And know when Evan McMullen internal, the surprise showing Evan McMullen is winning, like from a polling firm.
Informed ballots bad.
From a polling firm.
Informed ballots
from a polling firm.
Bad.
From what I can tell,
I also think
has not pulled anything in like 12 years from what I can tell. Like,
well, the other thing I think that is interesting, and I think that this gets to a broader conversation about forecasting, is I think that as polls have become bigger and bigger, they've missed more and more, I think, frequently. Mm-hmm. And I think also as, the country has become more polarized and it's become easier to predict election outcomes just by using fundamentals and not even looking at polls. Obviously, you can't fully do that yet, but it's become
we're almost there.
We're almost there.
Mm-hmm.
It's become a much better heuristic than it used to be. What we're kind of saying now with all this is not that we never pay attention to polls, but that when polls show something vastly different from the fundamentals, we're going to be very skeptical of that, mm-hmm. right? There are certain situations where we can all agree the fundamentals are not going to be a good indicator. The 2018 Ohio Senate race, the 2018 West Virginia Senate race, those might be good examples. We can all agree that for a variety of reasons, we pay more attention to the polls and less to the fundamentals. But in situations like these in South Dakota, in these kind of sleepy races, the fundamentals are just so powerful. It's going to take a lot for us to move off that. And so,
the difference in fundamentals versus polling, even in this cycle, Kansas. You have an incumbent Democratic governor. You're more likely to look at the polls for that.
But also, I mean, even in I also think the Kansas abortion referendum was actually a pretty good example of this, right? If you looked at the fundamentals, assuming that you took issue polling about abortion somewhat seriously, right? The fundamentals would have told you that the pro-choice side had a pretty good chance to win, as you're looking at Kansas's demographics, education, etc. But the polls mostly had the pro-choice side losing, and that was a case where the fundamentals ended up winning out. And so I think that, I think you should pay more attention to the fundamentals than just polls.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But yeah, with that, we've probably run our course with this discussion. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this off for the night. Again, thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate all your support. We could not do this without you. I think Joe wants to rep his Phillies right here.
God bless the fighting.
But yeah, we have ratings update, of course, coming to you Monday as usual. We got some exciting races. We're planning it, vigorously debating internally. We got a new finance report coming up this weekend.
Someone is going to stab someone.
Yeah, we're going to be excited to get into. So yeah, so we'll see you all next week. You can find us at Elections Daily, at Elections_Daily on Twitter. All your social media platforms, all your podcast platforms, we're there. So yeah, we'll see you next week. And we hope you have a good week. And we'll be here same time, hopefully, for Elections Weekly. See ya.